Hey everyone, this is Alex from warnoffkeys.com, and in this video, I'm going to show you how you can create your own configurable welcome channel so server owners using your bot can configure a welcome message to be sent every time someone joins the server. I'll also be showing you how to simulate a join with a custom simulate join command, which will then simulate that you join so you don't have to use alt accounts to test out the new functionality. Now, real quick, I want to mention that knowing JavaScript is required to follow this video and this entire series. If you don't know JavaScript, don't worry. You can scroll down to the description of this video, and at the top, you'll see JavaScript course. There is an hour-long crash course here on YouTube, which you can right-click and open this in a new tab, so you can watch that after you're done with this video. So in this video, I'll be using warnoffkeys commands as my command handler, and if you prefer to use a different command handler, then feel free to use that. All the concepts will be the same as long as you know how to create your own commands. So far, I've told warnoffkeys commands where my command folder is, as well as what test servers I have, so we can register guild-based /commands for that test server. Now going into this episode's folder, I want to make two more folders within here. The first one will be called features, which will basically hold all of our event listeners. And the second one will be called models, which will hold all of our MongoDB schemas. Now this will be using MongoDB. That way it's fully customizable between multiple different servers. And if you don't know MongoDB, I have an entire playlist here on YouTube. A link to that can be found in the description down below. So the first thing we want to do is create a schema within our models folder, which will explain how our data should be stored within Mongo. So I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call this welcome-schema.ts. And if you're using JS, of course, you'd want to use JS instead. So within here, we then need to import Mongoose. Within JavaScript, that'll be const mongoose equals require mongoose. But within TypeScript, that will be import mongoose from mongoose. And if you don't already have Mongoose installed, you can install it with npm install mongoose. I already have it installed, so I'm just going to cancel this and close my console. Now, in addition to importing Mongoose, I also want to import schema, which is what we need to create in order to map out how our data should be structured. So I can now say const welcome schema equals new schema with an object, and within here, we can specify what type of data we're going to have. Now, there are three properties here, and all of them are going to be required strings. So I'm going to create a constant here called recString, which stands for required string. And I'm going to say type is string and required is true. This is stuff we have to specify for all three of the properties we're going to soon add into our schema. And so making it into this one object that we can reference here will save us time. So the first thing we need is _ID, which is known as the primary key within a MongoDB schema. So here we want to specify that this is going to be a required string. And because _ID isn't very descriptive, I'm going to add in a comment saying that this will be the guild ID. Next, we're going to have the channel ID, which will also be a required string. And then also text, which will of course be a required string. So with these three pieces of information, we can now specify what channel is going to be welcoming users into what guild, as well as what message to send as the text. Next, we're looking to name this schema. And so I'm going to say const name equals welcome tutorial. And then we're going to export this within JavaScript. That would be module.exports equals, and in TypeScript, that would just be export default. Now what comes afterwards is the same for both JavaScript and TypeScript. And we want to essentially try and receive the model if it's already been created. Otherwise, we want to create it. So here we can say mongoose.models with an S. And we see that this is an object, but model without an S is going to be a function. So this function will create the model and then behind the scenes store inside the models object. And so with that said, we want to first see if it's already been created. So we could say models index of name, or we could then call the model method. So mongoose.model, we can then pass in name and then our schema, which is welcome schema. And by default, this will work so far, but Mongoose will actually add in an S to the end of this because it wants everything to be plural. This is something I personally don't want, and so what I can do is pass in the name again, and so having the name as the third argument will force Mongoose not to add in any S's to the end of this. So now our schema is ready. We're now ready to create our configuring command to actually set our schema data. So I can save this, and inside of our commands, I'm going to create a new file called setWelcome.ts. And again, if you're using JavaScript, you would use JS instead. But within here, we can now export an object. Within JavaScript, I could say module.exports equals an object. But within TypeScript, I can say export default object. And if you're also using TypeScript, we can specify what type of object this is by saying as iCommand. And iCommand is an interface within Warn-Off-Keys commands, which gives us additional information about what can be inside this command. So let's start off with the category, where I will say configuration, and the description will then say sets the welcome channel. And we want to make sure that only certain people can use this command. This will be an array of strings. We'll pass in administrator. We also want a certain number of arguments to be provided. So I could say the minimum number of arguments is 2. And there is no maximum by default, so we'll just keep that the same. But we also want to specify our expected arguments. So within here, I can say channel as well as text. So the channel will be a mention of the channel that we want to actually send welcome messages in. And the text can be the actual message that is sent to the user. Now, I also want to provide support for a slash command as well as a legacy command. So we can do !set welcome as well as / set welcome. And Warn-Off-Keys commands makes this really easy to do. So I can say slash is a string of both. And we only want to register guild-based slash commands when testing. And because I've already specified my test servers here, where you would want to specify your own test guild ID, we can now say test only is true. This will make this command, whether it's slash commands or legacy commands, only work in the specified testing servers. And once the command is fully working, you can then comment this out. That way it'll create a global slash command in all servers using your bot. So I'll uncomment this for now. And if you're familiar with slash commands, you might be familiar with the concept of options. You can actually pass in your own custom options object into Warn-Off-Keys commands just like this. Now, if you did not specify options, behind the scenes, Warn-Off-Keys commands will automatically infer your own options from the arguments here. But it will always use strings as these because it does not know what type we want. Because we want to mention a channel, I want to make sure that this first argument is going to be its own channel mention. And so with that said, we have to pass in our own custom options here. This is actually fairly simple to do. Here we can say name, which I'll say is channel. We can have a description, which I will say the target channel. I can then have required is true. And now I want to import Discord.js at the top of my file. So I can import DJS from Discord.js. Now within here, I can specify the type, which will be djs.constants.application command option types.channel. And this is the reason here why we want to specify our own options, because this will give the user a dropdown where they can specify what channel they want to use. Now we also need to provide information about the second command here, which is the string. So here we can say name is text. The description is the welcome message. We can say required is true. And the type will be djs.constants.application command option types.string. Now after the options, we can have our callback method, which we ran every single time a user actually runs this command. We can add in our own object here to destructure some properties from this. And we also want to make this an asynchronous function because we will be using await inside of it. So now inside of here, we need a couple different pieces of information, such as the guild, the message, the interaction, and the arguments. Now, message is passed in only for legacy commands, and interaction is passed in only for slash commands. So interaction will be null if we did !set welcome, and message will be null if we did / set welcome. So that is one thing to keep in mind. And before we actually write this code, we need to import our schema. So I can say import welcome schema from. We can go back into our models folder and access our welcome schema there. Now inside of here, we want to first gain access to the mentioned channel. And we want to do that whether or not it was a legacy command or a slash command. So I can say const target equals. Now here we'll use a ternary operator. So if message does exist, we can then say message.mentions.channels.first, or we'll say interaction.options.getChannel. Here we can pass in our own string that has to be the same exact name as this right here. So I'll pass in channel. And now we have access to our channel here. So we want to make sure that this channel exists, as well as make sure that this is a text channel. So I can say if not target, or target.type is not exactly equal to guild_text. So in the case of a legacy command where message exists, we might not actually tag anything. And so in that case, this here will be undefined. So this is why we're checking not channel. And also within either of these options, the user could specify a voice channel, for example. And so we need to specify the type here must be guild text. So if the channel doesn't exist, or if the type is not equal to guild text, we then want to tell the user to actually tag a text channel. Now in warn off keys commands, you can simply return a string, and this will apply to either the legacy command through the message or the / command interaction. So I can simply say return, please tag a text channel. Now afterwards, we know for sure that we have access to a text channel. We now want to get the actual text that the user provided here, or as the second argument here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable using let, and I'll call this text. And I'll set this equal to interaction with a question mark dot options dot get string. Here we'll pass in text because that's the same exact name as we specified in our options object here. And this question mark is known as optional chaining. So essentially, this will make sure that interaction actually exists. It's very similar to saying if interaction, then text equals interaction dot options, etc. So it just makes our code a little cleaner and easier to read. And now what I want to do is I want to see if message actually exists. So if message. Now, if this is the case, this was actually run as a legacy command, such as set welcome or some other type of prefix like that. And so with that said, we know that interaction is going to be null in that case because interaction is only there if it's a / command, which means the optional chaining here would make this text undefined. So we need to gain access to the text from the actual legacy command. So now one thing to keep in mind is that we also have this channel argument first, and we don't want that to be part of the actual messages sent. So we need to first remove that. So this args property here will be an array of every individual word that's sent. So what we want to do is first remove the first index by saying args.shift. And then afterwards, we should be left with an array where each individual word is an element. So I can say text equals args.join with a space. And so this will essentially turn our array of different words into a normal sentence. So far we have access to our channel as well as the message and the guild. So we can go ahead and save this information into the database. There's a couple ways to do this within MongoDB. And one way I want to do this is to make sure that we can update this later on. So we can use find one and update. I'm going to go ahead and write the code and then I'll explain what each step does afterwards. So I can say await welcome schema dot find one and update. And then we'll pass in 3 empty objects here. The first one is going to be the actual search to do. So in this case, we want _ID to be our guild ID. So I could say guild.id. And here we're getting this error because guild is possibly null. And that's actually something we might want to check just in case the user is running this inside a direct message. So at the very top of the callback, I can say if not guild, which is only going to be the case if they're running a command outside of a guild, such as in a direct message. I can then return saying, please use this command within a server. So because of this, we now know that guild is going to be valid because otherwise we would have returned back here. So this is the search to provide against our schema here. And as I mentioned, _ID is the guild ID. So it's going to try and find one item in our collection that matches this. And then it's going to take the data in the second object here, and it's either going to insert it or update it. So here we have to also specify the same thing of guild.id. Then we can specify text as well as channel ID being target.id. We have to specify upsert is true. This is a combination of insert and update. So basically if something exists with this ID, it will then update it with the new information here. So server owners can still update the text or update the channel. But if this doesn't exist, it would then insert it using all this information here. So now afterwards, we want to let the user know that the channel was actually set. So I can say return welcome channel set. And before we actually listen for new joins or before we simulate joins, we want to make sure that this actually works. So if I save this and I go into my console, I can use npm run dev to start my bot. Now I'm about to go into my MongoDB console, which does not have a dark mode yet. So if you're in a dark room, watch your eyes because the screen will get bright. Here I'm on my welcome tutorial. If you don't see that within your MongoDB console, you can go ahead and click on refresh at the top right and then try and find it on the left panel here. So within here, by default, there will obviously be 0, and I can click on apply to search again. And so far there's nothing in here, but if we try and run that command, we should actually see it work. So I could do /set welcome. Here we can specify a channel, and this is why we provided the options object because we can now select anything here. I'm going to select a voice channel specifically just to make sure that we can only provide a text channel. Now the actual text, I'll just say test for now, and it'll then say, please tag a text channel. If I use set welcome and say test, where this first argument should be a channel tag, it should say the same thing. So now we know that that check works. I can now say set welcome. I can specify the welcome channel. And for the text, I can then say welcome to the server. Now the @ symbol here will be a placeholder to actually mention the user. So then I can run this command, and we actually get an error because I forgot to mention that we do not have a MongoDB connection set up within WarnOffKeys commands. Now, if you've already manually created your own MongoDB connection within your bot, then that probably worked for you. But if you're using WarnOffKeys commands, we can specify our Mongo URI here, which I have stored in my .env file. So I can say process.env.mongo_URI. Of course, yours might be different, and that'll be your own unique login for your Mongo. And this will be your own unique login string for your Mongo server, which you can get on mongodb.com. And if you don't know how to do that, again, I have a complete MongoDB series on YouTube, so you can check that out in the description down below. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we should connect to our MongoDB database, where then we can actually use this and save things to our schema. So if I go back into my server, I can now do /set welcome. I can specify the welcome channel, and then the text, I can say welcome to the server. If I run this, it'll then say welcome channel set. And if I go back into MongoDB, I can then click on apply. And here we see the guild ID right here, the channel ID right here, and then the text welcome to the server. So each individual guild that uses your bot can have its own record here. And then what we can do is we can load that whenever someone joins and then send them a message. So going back into VS Code, I can close my bot and I can minimize my console. I now want to listen for whenever new people join the server. And so we can do that within our features folder here. I can make a new file and call this welcome.ts. And of course, use JS if you're using JavaScript. Within here, we're looking to export a function. So I can say export default client. This is the parameter, which we can specify as an actual Discord.js client. And we can also export a constant known as config, which is an object. And this is something specifically for WarnOffKeys commands. This basically will provide some information about this feature. So in the future, once WarnOffKeys commands allow server owners to disable or enable certain features, they have the ability to do so. So there are only two properties we have to pass in. The first one is our display name, which is basically what the users will see. In this case, I'll say welcome channel. And then we also have our DB name, which should never be changed, even if you change this display name here. The DB name is what will be stored inside the database. And so I'm going to say welcome_channel. And while the exact capitalization and formatting doesn't actually matter, I'm writing it like this just so I know in the future that this is the DB name, because obviously this isn't the type of formatting we would use when displaying something to a user. So now within this function here, we can go ahead and listen to new people joining by saying client.on guild member add, and then we'll have access to a member here. And we want to make this function call asynchronous because we'll be using our Mongo schema, which we also need to import. So import welcome schema from, we'll go back to our models and access our welcome schema. And now here we want to get access to the text for this guild and then send that to the message. But one thing we want to keep in mind is that we do not want to reach into the database every single time. So there are two ideal solutions to this where we don't have to reach into the database every single time. The first of which is going to be load all the data when the bot starts up. The second option will be load and store the data only when needed. So I'm going to use the second option here. And basically this means that we will store all the needed data inside of our current process's memory. And if it doesn't exist there, we will then fetch it from the database and then store in memory. So with that said, I'm going to create an object to store all the information we need. So I can say const welcome data equals an object. And if you're using TypeScript, you'll want to specify what type of data will be stored here. So I can say as an object. And then here we can specify that the key will be a string. And we're actually looking to store an array here. Now the brackets here have no correlation with these brackets here. We would use the brackets on the key even if we were storing a string or a Boolean or some other type of data like that. We just happen to also be storing an array. And in this array, I want to specify a text channel as well as a string. And this string will be the actual text to send, and this key here will be the guild ID. So to make this super clear, I'm going to add in a comment here saying guild ID, channel, and then message. This way, it's a little more descriptive of what we're actually storing here. And again, all of this code should not exist here if you're using standard JavaScript. This should only exist if you're using TypeScript. So now here, I'm looking to access first the guild and the ID of this member. So I can say const guild ID equals member. And now we want to access the data from the welcome data object. So I'm going to use a let here because I do plan on changing this value in the future. So let data equals welcome data index of guild.id. Because again, the key here is a guild ID as we specified right here. So now what I want to do is I want to say if not data, which means we have not stored this into local memory, we would then want to fetch it from the database and then store in local memory. So I can say const results equals await, which is why I made this function asynchronous here. So await welcome schema dot find by ID. We can pass in the guild ID. So we can use this method because our underscore ID property here is meant to be the guild ID. And so it'll essentially just find where underscore ID equals guild ID. So here I can say if not results, which means that no welcome channel is configured for this server. We can just simply return. So here I want to get access to the channel ID and the text inside their own variables, so we can destructure those. Channel ID and text equals results. And now we want to gain access to the actual channel from the channel ID. So I can say const channel equals guild.channels.cache.get and pass in the channel ID. And now we can assign this information into our data variable here, so we can have access to it after this if statement. But more importantly, we can also assign it into our welcome data, so in the future, we don't have to fetch it from the database. So I can say data equals welcome data index of guild.id equals, and this will basically just assign this here to both of these variables right here. So let's replace this right here with an array. We can pass in channel and text. And this is the same array format that we see right here, where we have an actual channel and text. Now, if you're using TypeScript, you might get an error here because this is going to be a generic channel, not necessarily a text channel. So if you're using TypeScript, at the end of this, we can say as text channel. And this will tell it that this is meant to be a text channel, which makes this error go away right here. So now outside of this if statement, we now know that either we pulled our data locally from memory, or we fetched it from our database and then stored it in memory. So either way, we have access to the information we need. So I can say data index 0, which is our channel, dot send. I can then pass in an object where we can have content, which will be equal to data index 1, which is our actual text here as the message. But we want to replace the @ symbol with a mention of the actual user. So I can say dot replace. We can then say /@ @/g, which will replace all instances of the @ symbol with the user's @. And then the string here will be what we actually want to replace it with. So I'm actually going to use template literals, and I'm going to say less than @ symbol greater than. And this is the syntax to actually mention someone within Discord. So in between the @ symbol and the greater than symbol, I can pass in ID, which we just structured up here. And this will actually replace the @ symbol here on all instances of the message with an actual mention. So now I can save this, and we need to make one more simple command to simulate a join. If you have an alt account handy, you can go ahead and use that, but this command is incredibly simple, so I'm just going to go ahead and make it. So I can say simjoin.ts. We're going to export an object here as I command, and here the category will be testing. The description will be simulates a join. We can then have / as both and test only as true. Now here we can have a callback, and we want to destructure the member as well as the client. So here we can say client.emit, which will send an event on the client object, which is the exact same thing that happens when someone actually joins the Discord server. So this event will be guild member add, which happens to be the exact same thing we're listening to right here. And so we have to pass in a member so it has access to the member. So we're just going to simulate ourselves. Here we go here. Now, because this is used as both a / and legacy command, we do want to return with something because / commands do expect a response. So I can say return join simulated. Now, if I save this and I run our bot using npm run dev, I can now go into Discord And I want to set the welcome channel again using another message. So I can say set welcome, specify the welcome channel, and the message is going to be welcome at to the server. And just to prove that all instances of the at symbol will be replaced with a mention, I can say at here again, and I'm going to use a dot as a period, and then I can go ahead and send this. It'll say welcome channel set. I can then use simulate join, and it'll say join simulated, but nothing actually happens, and that's because we have to go back into our index file, and we have to specify where our features files live. So here under the command stir, I can say features dir is path.join __ dir name, and then features. Of course, if you use a different folder name, you'd want to specify that here. So I can save this. I can then go back into Discord, and I can do ! simulate join. It'll say join simulated, and here it's going to say welcome at Alexander Flores to the server, and it has my at again here. Now, the last thing I want to show you is how to disable mentions here in case you do not want this tagging users. Oftentimes you do, but just in case you don't, you can go over to your welcome file whenever you're sending the message. And here we can pass in allowed mentions as an object. And here we can allow different types of mentions from replied users, roles, or users. And we can simply pass in an empty array here as users, and this will now no longer tag anyone. So if I save this and I go back into Discord, I can go into general and I can try / simulate join. This will then send a new message here, but as you can see, I am not being tagged. Thanks for watching the video. If you want access to video source code, as well as early access to future tutorials, consider clicking on the join button down below the video to support the channel.